Record Recording has been started. Streaming has been started.
Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the Council for Strategic Affairs monthly program. Today is June 29th, 2024, Saturday, approximately a few minutes after 10 a.m. I'm sharing my PowerPoint with you. Today's topic for the distinguished lecture was supposed to be India-US relationship in the Asian century. And we had a speaker, Professor Sumit Ganguly from Indiana Universities. But because of some unavoidable reasons, he is not able to join us today. At Council for Strategic Affairs, we have a dictum: the show must go on. So although our invited speaker is not present today, we will convert this presentation into a panel discussion, and we have two distinguished panelists whom I will introduce. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. CSA imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. The Council encourages publication of articles on geopolitics. We condemn terrorism in all its forms worldwide, and the Council aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. We have a monthly roundtable discussion on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. And we have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month at the same time. That was supposed to be today. We also conduct one-on-one interviews under a feature called Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publication of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. We have a summer internship program for college students and a fellowship training program in strategic studies. So, the topic for today's discussion is India-US relationship in the Asian century. While 20th century was the American century, 21st century has been dubbed as the Asian century. Some people say that it is just a euphemism for 21st century being Chinese century. The 20th century saw convergence of US and Chinese interests leading to disintegration of the Soviet Empire. 20th century also led to emergence of the USA as the sole hyperpower in the world after the dissolution and disintegration of the Soviet Empire. As far as India-US relationship is concerned, there has been a slow and steady improvement in the bilateral relationship since the end of the Cold War. Yes, there have been some roadblocks here and there, but by and large, there has been continuity in bilateral relationship since the beginning of 21st century. So what are the future contours of this relationship? In the remaining 3 quarters of this century, we will be discussing this in our panel discussion. So our first panelist is Dr. Joseph M. Chachil. He's Chief Medical Officer at Novo Integrated Sciences Incorporated. He's a healthcare innovator, author, media contributor, and LLM candidate. He's leading healthcare innovations with a global impact. He is advancing the intersection of medical science, law, ethics as an LLM candidate at the University of Edinburgh Law School. He is steering healthcare systems towards transformative future as the author of Beyond the COVID-19 Pandemic, envisioning a better world by transforming the future healthcare in India beyond the pandemic, a sustainable path towards global quality healthcare. He shares his insights on US-India relationship and on public policy as a regular media commentator. He is honored as a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives for Leadership in Healthcare Administration.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, and I'm very delighted to say that Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor is an integral part of the Council for Strategic Affairs. He is a former diplomat. He was member of IFS, Indian Foreign Services in India, and he is also on the International Advisory Board of the Council for Strategic Affairs. He's a former visiting clinical professor, international trade, sustainable development, and security issues at the School of Public Policy at University of Maryland, College Park, a faculty mentor for student body, DESI. He has been teaching graduate courses on development, diplomacy, and leadership, mentoring, guiding students, teaching in executive development programs, and coordinating global leadership program for senior government officers, business executives, and diplomats from many countries. He has made significant contributions to outreach activities and international branding of UMD in India with leaders, officials, diplomats, business representatives, and students from Vietnam, Indonesia, Brunei, China, Cambodia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and from very many countries from Latin America and Africa. He is the chairman of Wheels Global Foundation. He is also chairman Advisory Council of Diplomacy India, president of International Conference on Connecting World Heritage Sites and Civilizations, an adjunct professor at the Management Development Institute in Gurugram in India. He is an alumnus of IIT Delhi with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, a master's in management and systems. He is author of many articles and proficient in English and Hindi, features Spanish. So these are the flags of the two countries, and these are the leaders of the two countries. And if you see, these are the maps of India and US. A few housekeeping rules before we start the panel discussion. Please keep yourself muted to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt the panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves will be asked to pose questions, so no anonymous questioners, please. All the questions are moderated through the chat function. Please be precise and specific in asking a question. And please don't send detailed comments in the form of a monologue. This event is being recorded on our YouTube channel and will be available, but we are also simultaneously live streaming this on our YouTube channel. First and foremost, I would like to thank our distinguished panelists, both of them, who within next half an hour stepped in so that the show must go on. I will invite our first discussant, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, to give his opening statement between 5 to 7 minutes on India-US relationship in the Asian century. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, please. Welcome to the platform.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee, and I must congratulate you and the entire team at CSA for continuing to do such great service for US, for India, and for the world. Now, we are discussing about India-US relations in the Asian century. And I have been, personally involved in these aspects of India-US relations for a very long time now, for many decades. Starting in the early 90s, when I was Deputy Secretary Americas in the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi. And got into it in very great depth at that time. And thereafter, I was also professor at the university, Georgetown University, at the School of Foreign Service, which is one of the most prestigious schools of foreign service in the world. That was also in the early 90s, 91, 92, where again I discussed a lot about South Asian diplomacy, India US relations, and so many other aspects of India's relations with the world. Uh, so I thereafter continued to be an academic in the US. Uh, I was visiting scholar also at George Washington after my tenure at University of Maryland College Park as professor on public policy, and I also teach in Nepal and other countries. Now, where were our relations earlier between India and US? Where are they now? Where are they headed? I will just briefly talk in the opening statement on these three aspects primarily, and then get into it in greater depth as we go along. Both countries influenced each other's independence movements in a very significant manner. For the Indian independence fighters, the American philosophers were leading lights and were beacon lights on how to fight for independence, on their thoughts, on their vision. And the Americans supported Indian independence much before we got our independence by asking the Indians to open an embassy in Washington, D.C. With the ambassador here even before independence, which was not as per diplomacy or as per diplomatic protocols, but America was not interested in diplomatic protocols or getting bogged down by those aspects. So similarly, for the American movement of independence, we had the Boston Tea Party, where the Americans rebelled against paying taxes to the British masters at Boston by throwing away all the Indian tea, which was being imported by Britain from India to the US, and the taxes were being levied here and being taken back to England. So that was the Indian connection also to that. And thereafter, there have been very profound influences in the US revolution during the civil rights movement, for example, with Mahatma Gandhi's movement of non-violence being followed very, very closely by Martin Luther King and others. So historically, we have had, I'm just giving you a very broad overview, a broad sweep of the interactions. There have been much deeper and more profound interactions, but coming to where are we now? We are at the tipping point of our relations. The relations have deepened, have broadened, have expanded phenomenally in all spheres that you can imagine. In the defense spheres, we have very close contacts. We have, observers. We have military exercises. We have people being exchanged at the ministries of defense and the Pentagon, and a lot of technology, a lot of advances being discussed, a lot of intelligence being shared, and seeing how to face the threats which both the countries are facing in terms of the breaking America forces and the breaking India forces, the collusion between the two, and how to combat that in the days to come. On science and technology, in the chips domain, in any domain that you can think of, the intensity of the interactions is absolutely incredible. We have the ISET, for example, just as one example, the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technologies, which is going on in a very profound manner with the advances in science and technology being shared by both the countries on a very, very broad range of issues. If you see the joint statements, for example, I, as a diplomat, have been involved with writing out many joint statements when the leaders visit each other's countries. But I was absolutely amazed to see the joint statement which Prime Minister Modi and President Biden signed during the last visit. And the number of pages it contained The depth of it, the content of it was absolutely mind-boggling for a diplomat also. So that is what the current overview of the relationship is. Very good. America realizes that it is in its own strategic interest to partner with India if it has to successfully manage and cope with the challenges of the world today. And for India, it also makes good sense to partner with America. India has the largest rural population in the world. The population, just the rural population, India is the number one population in the world today overall. But even in terms of the rural population of India, we are about 897 million today, which is more than the Western world combined. For America, that presents a fantastic market and a fantastic economic opportunity for the future. Because the more numbers moving into the middle income group, even only from this segment, means fantastic opportunities for the entire population of America. Similarly, for India to get the technologies, to get the advances, to get defense technologies, to collaborate and cooperate on artificial intelligence, on Industry 4.0, on quantum, on chips, on so many areas where challenges are being faced on supply chains, for example, it makes a lot of common sense for both countries to get even further into their engagements. Where are we headed now? There are certain challenges, uh, particularly when there are democratic administrations in the US, Democrat administrations, and the president is from the Democrat Party. While the current understanding in the strategic community is very clear that their future lies with India, still there are progressives and other members who are called squad members and others, and the jihadis who have penetrated the administration, for example, keep on insisting on creating friction between India and US and talking about issues like human rights, which the Americans find it very difficult to understand it from the Indian context, even though they face a lot of challenges on human rights in US itself. And the Indians find it a very big irritant in our relations when we are the biggest democracy, the most solid democracy in the world, and we cannot be lectured on human rights by countries which themselves have lots of problems on human rights. So I'm going to stop here. My time is over, but I'll be back with the more comments. Dr. Adityanjee, back to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor, for a bird's eye view of history, evolution, and current state of affairs of India-US relationship, starting from pre-independence day and contribution of each country in each other's independence movement. Now it's my honor and privilege to invite Dr. Joseph M. Chachil to give his opening statement. Welcome, sir. You are coming for the first time on our platform, and that also with an emergency notice of 20 minutes. So I really admire the can-do spirit. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. On behalf of, I'm also, again, one thing which wasn't mentioned in the opening statement was that I'm also currently the chairman of the Indo-American Trust Association of Indian journalists, Indian origin journalists, and Indian media in the US and Canada. So we represent a lot of Indian interest in either mainstream media in the North America or Indian media, including TV and print and online. So thank you once again for having me. This is a very consequential time for Indo-US relationship. I would say, even the State Department calls it, the most strategic and consequential of the 21st century. So if the State Department calls it the consequential relationship between India and, so that, it shows what, significance they're giving it to it. Not just that we are the largest democracy having a relationship with the oldest democracy. We might be the only stable force in that region, and to balance the powers over there, especially when you talk about the century of Asian, we want to make sure that democracy and stability has a say in it. So, US have been doing a lot, from the 2+2 ministerial collaborations in defenses, in clean energy, in space collaborations, as you know much. There's a lot of multilateral collaborations with the UN, with the G20. We're talking about with the Quad. But what is critical, I think, going forward for the people who, again, if your viewers are citizens of US or India, would be the people-to-people ties. Ultimately, nothing happens without people-to-people ties. We can have all sort of collaboration between NASA and ISRO, or we could have GE engines being made in India, but that does not, I would say, put foundation for a long-term friendly relation between two nations. Why is America friends with Canada, no matter who is in the administration? Because there is a strong people-to-people ties between Canadians and Americans. Why is America friends with the British? Same here. It's not because of they're in friendly with the Queen or the King or the Prime Minister of UK versus the President of US. It's that the British people and the American people have strong relationships. They travel to each other's country, they enjoy each other's country, they vacation in each other's country, and they do business with each other. That's something we need. Again, that's something which China may not have. There might be, China is doing it where they are now controlling or importing products and maybe becoming a major economy. But if you look into the friendship between Chinese citizens and US citizens, there is still, that's not there. You don't see Chinese citizens, leading American companies. You don't see Chinese citizens leading Fortune 500. There's no Chinese IITs, as like Ambassador Kapoor has said, coming in and taking over. There is no Chinese companies contributing to American economy. It's just a one-way street. Compared to India, it's a different way. So Indians are invested into America. Indian diaspora have been supporting American economy, from politics to leadership to civic associations to mid-level providers. We are one of the, again, the leading taxpayers as a per capita entity in the US. Our diaspora leads companies. We have senior physicians. Again, I'm also an advisor to an association called API, which is the Association of Indian Physicians in the US, which has over 100,000 or more physicians of Indian origin who came here 30, 40 years ago. And then they struggled and they won. They went to the rural Americas, where nobody wanted to go because of the J1 visa waiver programs, which forced them to go into rural areas where they were able to get H1 visas. Now they became the leaders in that village. There's some math saying that 1 in 7 American patient is seen by an Indian doctor. Everybody from the Surgeon General, of the US for the past, few terms, to the Vice President, to many, I would say, state board presidents, state medical board presidents, university senior leaderships, to senior thought leaders now are of Indian origin. So if I'm an Indian, people either think you are either an IT techno guy or you are a doctor. But that's not the situation with our counterparts in China. So if you say you are a Chinese citizen, they're afraid. Are you a spy? You're working for a Chinese government? Is your government funded by the Communist Party? So there is all that distrust. So that's why I'm focusing that in the future, what's within our control. Again, we don't know who's going to become the next president of the US. We don't know how the relationship is going to go, but at least one thing which is for sure, India has become a stable democracy, stable for the past 10 years, now stable for the next 5 more years, and hopefully going forward under Prime Minister Modi, which is a good thing. And they're opening up and welcoming foreign businesses and reforming the businesses, reforming the economy, reforming the country in such a way that we can grow to be one of the fastest economy in the world. We will, India as a path for becoming a developed nation like US. That's something, again, makes other people uneasy. But what we can do as people is that let's talk about it. Let's see where can we build more relationships between normal Americans. How do we invite more Americans to India to visit us, to learn our culture, learn the country, learn our religion? It's critical. We don't offend anybody. We are very welcoming. So I would close that with that, and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chachil, for your narrative on civilizational and cultural ties between these two great nations. And indeed, India-US relationship has become a multi-dimensional juggernaut that cannot be stopped by minor irritants on the road. So I'm glad that you talked about the cultural and civilizational ties because they are very, very important. Just like there are cultural and civilizational ties between the United States and Israel. It's a relationship that despite all the ups and downs, nobody can, deny or nobody can take advantage of. So yes, there are dimensions that we have not discussed in diplomatic world or strategic community between the two countries. So now after the opening statements, I will ask both the panelists a couple of questions and then we will move on to the next phase of questions from the audience. So my first question goes to Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, since we are talking about Asian century, there was a time in the beginning of this decade that a great paper by former national security advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Mr. Bergsten, talked about US and China creating a G2 condominium and divide the entire world into two, blocks under the hegemony of these two nations. And it was very widely, very warmly received by China. But the Obama administration did not have much sort of appetite for it. Where do you see that proposal? And where do you see India's role in achieving multipolarity?
Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee, for highlighting the aspects of the paper also. My viewpoint on the G2 proposal is as follows, that I think it is getting too late for China to assume that mantle for various reasons. First of all are the geopolitical reasons. The amount of frictions and tensions that it has created in its neighborhood with almost all of its neighbors. I can hardly think of any neighbor with which it does not have very serious tensions or difficulties. With India, we all know the problems which exist on the Ladakh border and otherwise. I will not get into all those details, but just to give an overview. Similarly, in the South China Seas and the East China Seas, there's tremendous difficulties with Philippines, Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Korea, Vietnam, very serious also. And on the Russian border, it has problems with Russia. So there are hardly any countries with which it does not have serious problems. Secondly, internally, where do I see China today? It is a country with a graying population that is creating its own difficulties, and those difficulties will only become more serious as time passes. The economy of China, by many accounts, is very fraught currently. So many different areas in railways, in the production, in the general consumption, in the GDP. So it is currently, even economically, in a very difficult situation. It is trying, to create tensions with Taiwan, for example. On Hong Kong also it has problems. In Tibet it has problems with the Tibetans. In Xinjiang it has problems with the local population. So internally also you see that there are too many difficulties it is going to face, which are not, which cannot be dismissed, which are rather very serious. So to the scholars in the next few years will be questioning the aspect of the Asian century very seriously, because China will not be in the reckoning in a very short time from now. Now, what will happen instead is um, about the Indian economy, which Dr. Chalil also mentioned. I appreciate his comments. Thank you, Dr. Joseph, for mentioning about things like people-to-people contact and so many other aspects. Now, if we see the Indian economy for the last 2000 years of recorded history, before that it would have been even more glorious era for India. But there was a paper which I read in The Economist, which is by no means a pro-India magazine. But there was this article on the global GDP contribution by different countries in 2000 years. And the paper had been written by The Economist, by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and by Angus Madison. Now, in that paper, no mention was made of India. But the graphs which were shown, which portrayed very clearly that the Indian contribution towards a global GDP in purchasing power parity terms for the first 1000 years was about 1/3 of the global GDP, 30% approximately. For the next 500 years, it was about 25% of the global GDP. And economists, being economists, did not mention about India, even though it was the greatest contributor to global GDP in the first 2000 years. Thereafter, the contribution by India went down because of the Muslim invasions, the sort of genocides which happened in India, the disruption of the social fabric in India, which was further exacerbated when the British Raj came and completely destroyed the progress which India was making in industry, in economy, in so many different areas. Now, finally, we find that India is coming back again in a very significant way on the global stage in all the spheres of existence. So we are already the fourth biggest economy in the world. Many economists have very clearly predicted by 2030, India will be the third largest economy in the world. And many institutions, organizations, and individual economists have predicted that by 2050, India will be the number one economy in the world. So if we are headed towards that, it may be time for scholars to start thinking of writing the Indian century rather than the Asian century. And that should become also an important point of discussion for the world, because the greatest contributor towards the GDP, in terms of the highest GDP of the world, and the driver of the global economy today is India. And if you take out India from the global mix, then the GDP of countries other than India is very, very low. And that makes it very difficult, because if you don't have a massive country like India with a young demography, the other important aspect is demography. 65% of the population of India is less than 35 years of age. So they have a long way to go, and they have a lot of bright future ahead. And they will be great contributors. Dr. Joseph mentioned about API, over 100,000 doctors. So, almost 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 doctors in the US today is of Indian origin. But if you see from the other aspect also of the engineers, I'm from the IIT, so I can speak quite authoritatively on this also. The Pan IIT USA consists of more than 55,000 alumni of IITs who have been very significant contributors to the US economy, to the extent that the US House Resolution number 227 of 2005 mentioned IIT specifically by name, saying that its contributions to the US economy is appreciated. And the contribution has only been increasing over time. 28% of the startups in Silicon Valley are from Indian engineers. The CEOs who are presidents of organizations or in the C-suite, in the top suite of any business in the US today, a very large number, to the extent of 300 of the Fortune 500, will have Indians in the top C level, executives. The administration itself has a lot of Indian origin people at senior positions, as we all know. I will not start listing out those. The diaspora in India is making phenomenal contributions, and the Americans appreciate it because it is law abiding, it is rule compliant, and it is tax paying. It is a community with the highest per capita ethnic earnings in the US. So therefore paying a large amount of taxes as a ethnic group, but also contributing in a very positive way to the country, to the economy, to every sphere of existence, to science, to dance, to music, to all aspects of life here. So if you see the jails in the US, for example, how many Indian Hindus are in jails, or Indian Muslims, or Indian Christians, or Indian anybody, all over the country? The number is absolutely statistically insignificant. There's hardly any. So if that is the sort of, from the other races, from the other classes, from the other groups, from the other ethnicities, there are large numbers. But as far as Indians are concerned, Bharatiyas are concerned, there's hardly anybody. So what I would like to say is that there is very phenomenal bipartisan understanding also in the US today. Both the chairs of the India caucus, Republican and Democrat, right to the president in every tenure, that as far as relations with India are concerned, both Democrats and Republicans are absolutely unanimous in support for furthering India-US relations. And that is a very standard maxim now. The diaspora here is contributing very significantly. The diaspora which has worked in India, the US diaspora, is not as large as the Indian diaspora in the US. That needs to increase now, because once they go to India, they learn about the culture, they learn about the people, they learn about democracy, they learn about all our systems. When they come back to the US, they will also become ambassadors of India for the US. So what we need to see is how to increase the American diaspora studying or working or traveling to India in very significant way. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Adityanjee.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. Dr. Chachil, you did talk about RP. You are a physician. I am also a physician. I am also a member of RP. I want to bring a very particular aspect of India-US relationship in 21st century. You know that in early 2000s, there was this SARS epidemic. And the origin of that epidemic was China. And predictably, there was suppression of information. There was spread of the SARS virus to Western countries by travel and all. And at that time, President Bush and Hu Jintao got into some discussion. And there was some, at national level, between US and China, collaboration. And one of that collaboration was in Wuhan Institute of Virology. And actually, NIH funds were transferred to China for gain of function research. Things are trickling down. Keeping in mind that a large section of US healthcare, especially the physician workforce, is of Indian origin, and 20% of each medical school class is medical students of Indian origin. They are not people from India. These are born and brought citizens of United States. So US medical fraternity is going to be predominantly or pluralistically large chunk will be Indian. Do you envisage much more advanced collaboration on biomedical research between India and US, analogous to what happened with China earlier?
So it's a very interesting thought, and and a very close topic, which is close to us because I wrote 2 books on it along with Ambassador Kapoor. One was Beyond the COVID-19 Pandemic, and recently India Beyond the Pandemic. So 2 books on this topic. Again, US, as you suggested, has NIH unofficially became the defense DRDO like we have in India. NIH became the defense funding lab of America, started doing gain of function or making, regular cold viruses become more effective for purpose of either bio warfare, bio weaponing, whatever you want to call it. And there have been clear evidence that the virus which created the COVID pandemic was not naturally, I would say, born. It was assisted in some labs, and I'm not sure anyone can wash away their hands from it. There's a reason why Dr. Fauci is no longer the NIH head. Everything has been shut down or closed or not talked about. But the involvement of China is pretty clear, or the mistakes they made. Again, was it an accident? Was it purposeful? We still don't know about it. But the significance of India in the world healthcare is really, really, really tremendous especially going forward. They're expecting, as you suggested, even though API talk about 100,000 Indian doctors, when I speak to American Medical Association, they talk about 270,000 or so Indian origin physicians in the US. So that means the 270,000, many of them are of Indian origin, means they went to train in American medical schools. They don't identify themselves as Indians. They don't join API. They don't go to India every twice a year, but they are American born, second generation, third generation, or they have Indian parents, and they are of Indian origin, by descent, So, but again, we will become more significant going forward, as you said, because of the shortage of doctors coming in. Not just doctors. We're talking about nurses, mid-level providers, and this is not just an American problem. Everyone. This is a very significant problem, which is very predictable. So it is coming in the US. It is true in Europe because, number one, the population is aging in the US. The doctors of senior doctors who came in 30, 40 years ago are now retiring. So the young doctors are not being trained yet because we don't make enough medical schools. Even if we have enough medical schools, we don't have any additional residency programs and fellowship programs to train them like before. And this problem is, as I said, it is not an American problem. It is a world problem. It is in Spain. It is in UK. It is in Germany. It is in France. So except maybe India. So I predict that, of course, there will be all these technological advances coming in from ChatGPT, like language learning modules or language action modules, which kind of do stuff as opposed to wait for a command to do it. Will be making decisions on life in the future. Which way the ambulance should go, which patient need to be admitted first in the ER, triaging. All these things could be done by AI, but it will not ever replace a doctor or a nurse. They will enhance. Maybe one doctor could see more patients because of the technological advances, because of the AI, but they will not replace a nurse. If someone need to change a patient's bedpan, then AI will not do it. You can do all the technology you want, and changing an IV bag, cannot be done, to robotics. So you still need human touch. So that's where India comes in. So I believe in the next 10, 20 years, India will be the only country in the world able and ready to supply the world with human resource capital, whether it is physicians, physician assistants, nurses, again, if done right. So India would need to change it in the sense the world need to realize this is going to happen, and they'll need to invest in India in improving our training programs, creating world-class doctors and nurses in India. I wouldn't be even surprised if someday, like we see, IT company call centers in Bangalore started 20 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised there'll be call centers or telemedicine centers, in Bangalore, housing 1,000 doctors, in a floor, sitting in front of, multiple screens, seeing patients' vitals and their lab reports live, and then creating the, annual physical test or initial triaging of a patient, and then telling them which patient actually requires an American doctor to be seen. So this is just going to happen. There's no way. I don't know any other country which has the human resource capital and the training ability to make this happen. So healthcare, I would say the next century will be India's century, like it was before when India started. As Ambassador went through in the history of India, like when we were, doing Ayurveda, when our university in Nalanda was teaching Ayurvedic treatments and healing principles to the Chinese, to the world, to the other leaders and all the other gurus in the world. I would say it's coming back. So not just in healthcare, but in other aspects in America. Again, that trust factor is gone after the COVID. If I have a choice of buying a Chinese-made product, or an American-made product, or an Indian-made product, I'm more likely to buy an American-made product first, an Indian-made product second, and the Chinese-made product last. So that has also forcing or suggesting companies to switch their manufacturing, from China to India or to other places. Like you can see Apple or Samsung or other companies now switching, which is also going to be boosting. Ambassador also mentioned about the Indian economy booming. One of the things we should see that Indian economy grew at 8.2, of GDP percent, but again, it did not grow by exporting out like China did. We grew by internal consumption. So India is self-reliant. India did not start exporting, million iPhones all of a sudden. That's why the economy grew, like China did. We are currently being stable. Our consumers are Indians in India, and someday I would say that would be assisted by more export in the future. So I would say the Indian growth is more stable, more predictable because of the internal consumer base India has. But in healthcare, we will lead the future. Whether it is research we need to get into, but NIH maybe not.
Thank you, Dr. Chachil. My next question goes to Ambassador Kapoor. Ambassador Kapoor, generally there has been an observation that India-US relationship, although it is unstoppable, it flourishes when there's a Republican administration, and there are some roadblocks that come whenever there is a Democrat administration. This has been the broad observation, although irrespective of party in power, either in India or in US, over the last 25 years, the relations have steadily progressed. In this context, I have written a paper on doctrine of Indian exceptionalism. I'm not sure if you went through the paper, but would it not be in the interest of bilateral relationship that the State Department diplomats and the establishment in US tries to understand India's position with the doctrine of Indian exceptionalism in mind as they propound US interests based on doctrine of US exceptionalism or American exceptionalism? Sir, please unmute yourself. You're muted.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee. The first big analysis of India-US relations under Democrat administrations and under Republican administrations was done in the Ministry of External Affairs in 1991, 92, 93. When I was the Deputy Secretary Americas, I was tasked with doing that. Well, the popular perception amongst the strategic community, amongst the media, amongst the people of India was that India-US relations prospered when there were democratic presidents. But we found that it was not the case. For the first, 45, 50 years of our independence also, it had done very well under Republican presidents, Republican administrations, and not done as well under Democrat presidents. Now, that is changing fast, and that has changed to a very great extent in the sense that it has become agnostic of the administration. Our relations will grow by leaps and bounds because today, the geostrategic community, the academic community, the think tank community, the political community, the political elite of the US, they understand that their future and their interests, where they lie, and how they can only be achieved with a solid and strong partnership with India. Notwithstanding that, in the democratic administration, what I find is that there are always more irritants alongside. While the relations are now progressing as solidly as they would progress under Republican, or sometimes even more solidly than that, like we have seen with Biden and Modi. But the irritants are there because there are a lot of elements in the state, Department of State, and in some other strategic areas here, maybe sometimes in the White House, maybe sometimes in, Pentagon or the NSA or wherever, that are more closely aligned to forces which want to disrupt India-US relations or which want to show India in a poor light. So you will have state administration, for the Department of State, for example, putting out a budget of so many tens of millions of dollars for study on human rights in India. Now, that is a very massive and major irritant. If you want to foster a positive relationship with a country like India, which is in your own interest also, very significantly, you cannot keep on getting distracted and diverted by irritants which are not relevant because they are being done by elements which have different values, different systems, not adequate understanding of the ground situation. So that is why in my earlier statement, I mentioned that what is now needed is a very large number of Americans to go to India to work, to study, to work in the embassies there, to do work in business there. Now, what will happen with that is their understanding about India will become a lot better, will become a lot clearer because of most of the people who have worked in India in any capacity and come back to the US. When I meet them here, their outlook and their expectations of India US relations is very different from people who have no exposure to India. So once that people to people contact expands in a very significant way, we already have about 5 million Hindus in the US. They are Bharatiya Hindus, they are Hindus from other countries, but this is a population which is very significant in the US, and the American Hindu Coalition with which I work also is in close sync with the administrations, whether it is Biden's administration or Republican administration, to see how we can work together, how we can strengthen their hands, how we can support them. So that sort of interaction is now required because India has been the home of immigration and immigrants. Probably US is called the melting pot, but a bigger melting pot and a bigger pot has been India from its history. When the forces of the army of Alexander the Great came to India, and when he had to go away after staying in India for about 10 months to a year, I was told that 65% of his army decided to stay back in India, 35% went back with him. So from those times onwards, the waves of immigration, the waves of immigrants, the waves of foreigners who have settled in India. If you see the Parsis from Iran, there are more Parsis in India than in Iran or any other country of the world. If you see the Nepalis, I've worked in Nepal. Some Nepalese experts have written articles and books also saying that there are more Nepalese of the working age group in India than in Nepal. If you see from Sri Lanka, there are millions of Tamilians and others from Sri Lanka who are settled in India. Similarly, if you just talk about Bangladesh, the number of Bangladeshis in India would be numbering maybe 40 million people today, according to estimates of the intelligence. So if that is the sort of numbers that we are dealing with in India historically and even currently, Iraqis, Afghanis, Pakistanis illegally entering India and staying there. So the numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. We don't have a robust control system which has been tried to be implemented. We have not succeeded so far. So we don't know the ground situation. But our relations with the US are very important for India, for US, and for the world, and for a better world. And that is the way to go. And how we do that is by greater sensitivity to each other's concerns, greater understanding of the other culture, of the other thinking, of the concerns of the other country, and how to help that country dealing with those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. My next question will go to Dr. Chachil. I know, Dr. Chachil, you are a physician, policy expert. You are not a politician. But I'm going to ask you a political question. What do you envisage would be impact of the recent election results in India on India-US relationship?
Again, if the results were contrary to what it was, in the sense if Prime Minister Modi did not come back to power, that would have negatively impacted Indo-US relationship. Again, what we love more than everything else is stability in the country, and Prime Minister Modi, by being a prime minister for 10 years and being a CM before that, has proven that he know what he's doing. He has created a force of stableness in India, and he is seen as not just a leader of India, but also as a respected leader of the world. So that Vishwa Guru sort of a world leader type of persona, definitely, whether it is with Trump or with Biden, it didn't show. People were thinking that, oh yeah, if President Trump lose the election, Prime Minister Modi and Biden will be enemies going forward. We're all proven wrong. Prime Minister Modi was able to work closely with President Biden's office and administration, even clearly meeting with the National Security Advisor and everybody else, and in what's happening in China, and even very recently, as of with this Tibet visit, which was a shocker to China. Well done diplomatic move. He has proven time and time again that whether he is very externally focused. He's focused on putting India back on its prominent stand where we deserve to be. One thing which I would say, if anyone listening from Indian government would do what India hasn't done yet, and the other administration, like the Chinese administration or the Pakistani government, or the Israeli government is doing, is they have engaged very strong public relations firms in the US to support the embassy, their activities, their policies. India, I don't think has done it enough, because if you look into the mainstream media, the articles coming in pro-India and versus anti-India, you clearly see there is an anti-India bias in mainstream American media. I'm talking about New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the USA Today, to a point. Again, even though many of our reporters, Indian origin reporters who are pro-India, are working for these journals, I can clearly say, again, I have examples of my own where we work with USA Today and giving very pro-India article into the USA Today. Weeks later, the editors come back and kicks them out, and then changes the entire story, and then putting up additional narratives of what is not pro-India into it, or pro or anti-Hindu into it. Whether the reception given to Vivek Ramaswamy, to our people, is clearly evident. It's there. So I would say, if people are listening, let's try to match what China or Pakistan or UAE is doing. Let's invest into not just doing right, but making sure the world knows we are doing right. So we need to publicize it. America is all about marketing. Simple thing. We call things healthcare. Doctor, you are also a doctor. And are we really taking care of people's health? No, it's a marketing. We are a sick care system. We fix when people are sick, but we call it healthcare. Man, that's invented by some nice marketing agency. Things like Affordable Care Act. It's neither affordable, neither does it care, but it's called Affordable Care Act, and so it sounds nice. So the American people believes it. So India need to do something, even though we are doing it right. Prime Minister is doing it right. India is a stable country, but the news comes out is what either Indie group is saying, or what Rahul Gandhi is saying, or somebody else is saying, given more prominence than what the Prime Minister of India is saying. So we need, even I had my own experience. We had an op-ed written by the Prime Minister on the last day of the G20. We were trying to get it published in major American mainstream media. Had a difficult time getting it published. So we need to have access. The only way to access the capitalistic American system is through large PR agencies, and we need to invest in it. There's no way around it.
Thank you, Dr. Chachil. We move on to the next phase of this discussion, where we take questions from the audience member. And I was looking at the chat function, chat room. There are no questions in the chat room. So I'll take the liberty of inviting one of our audience members to make some comments on the possibility of bilateral cooperation in energy sector. And I will invite Mr. Vijay Nilekani to make some comments on that. Mr. Nilekani, if you can make some comments on India-US cooperation in the energy sector.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of cooperation in the energy sector. I think the nuclear deal back in 2009 or whenever it was signed, nothing has really come out of it. The oil and gas, India's oil and gas exploration is largely a public sector exploration, and the private sector in the US has not shown a lot of interest. India probably has a lot of underground gas that could be fracked, but environmental and water and other issues will probably prevent that. There is some degree of cooperation in renewables. I think solar panels and windmills, but even there, China has such a dominating space in renewables. I think 90% of all solar panels in the world today are made in China. So it's tepid, I would say. I wouldn't say it's a thriving relationship. And partly it's because of the public-private sector type of interface. I think if India had a very large private sector, energy sector, I think there would have been a lot more possibilities or innovative ways of cooperating or coordinating, but that hasn't lived up to its expectations. In fact, the nuclear deal hasn't resulted in anything other than probably maybe India's access to uranium. So that's where I am. But
thank you, Mr. Nilekani, for pointing out where the cooperation is needed. Other domains where we can cooperate, where we have not performed very well in the bilateral relationship. So that's an area to be sort of pursued. I see a comment here from Dr. Ravi. There's common healthcare problem between both US and India. Is it possible to speak offline to come up with a proposal that both countries could work on together for a common goal? So it's a suggestion, and we'll definitely take it, forward, Dr. Ravi. We have two experts who have been working in the healthcare sector, Dr. Chachil and Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. Both have been working in the sector. So yes, the suggestion is very welcome. I think at this juncture, I would like to thank two of our panelists, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor and Dr. Joseph Chachil, to take up the opportunity at a very short notice of 20 minutes before this discussion started. So I'm really thankful to you from bottom of my heart. We do have a saying at CSA, the show must go on, come what may. So I am really thankful to both of you for, stepping up to the plate, if I may say so, and participating on this very important topic in a panel discussion. I'm highly thankful to our audience members who on a Saturday morning, take hour and quarter of an hour, 1.25 hours to participate in this discussion. I am also highly thankful to Team CSA. That includes people who are working in the background who never come show their face, and that is Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, Mr. Ankush Bhandari. Without their support, these programs are not possible. So thank you everyone once again. I'm also thankful to Mr. Nilekani to give his comments on the energy sector cooperation or lack of it thereof. We have identified some areas where the cooperation the pace can be accelerated, whether it is solar energy cooperation or common way to deal with healthcare issues in both countries. We will take your suggestions into consideration. And at this juncture, I would like to close this discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you to Dr. Chalil also very profoundly, very profusely for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I will be closing the meeting.